welcome to this episode of Evolve with 3Share. We're going to be talking about some accessibility best practices and some top mistakes to avoid and answer some of your questions. So today we have Libby, and I will let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Libby Schaper. I'm the Vice President of Technology here at 3Share. I've been here about 10 and a half years, but in my previous life, I worked for the University of Oklahoma, where digital accessibility became sort of a passion project of mine. I started working with the Disability Resource Center there so that we could make our sites more accessible across the board. And since then, I've been providing accessibility audit services for several of our clients and even training of a few of the developers and QA resources to better test for accessibility on our sites we create.
Thank you, Libby. So we're going to go in and we're going to go ahead and dive right in. If anybody has any questions throughout the webinar, on the right-hand side of the screen, you can ask questions in the chat. Robbie will be monitoring that, and we'll get to that at the end. So first, we're actually going to take a look at a few examples of some changes that we've made to our site recently to make it more accessible. So here was one that the contrast wasn't great with the light blue and the white, so we changed that to make it a little bit darker. The home page, kind of the same thing. The text didn't contrast right with the background image, so we changed some of that to make that better. Submit button, same thing. That blue color that we were using just wasn't good in providing us contrast errors, so we've changed all that to make that a little bit more user-friendly and more visible.
So the reason why these are important is because a lot of people have color blindness, and there's a color blindness checker that you can use to send your site through to kind of emulate different kinds of color blindness to make sure that your contrast is enough that the color blindness won't impact the content absorption.
So yeah, these are some quick, relatively easy changes that we made just even without a developer. That was just like really quick, high-level things that we could have done.
So we're going to talk about the top 5 accessibility mistakes that I see and the easiest ones to correct. The first one is missing or non-applicable alt text. If you're using a content management system of any kind, this one's really easy to combat. You can just build in a system that makes alt text required on images, or maybe even have it default to the name of the image. But that comes with its own challenges because context in which the image is used matters. So in this first example, the alt text is just straight up missing. And in the second example here, this is one that I've seen so many times I can't even count. You think you've created a foolproof system that forces authors to populate alt text each time they use an image. However, you never quite expect so many people to just populate alt text into the alt text field. But holy cow, do I see it all the time. So please don't do this. If you're just trying to make a shortcut, please just say what's in the image. It's not that difficult. And in this third example, I've created my logo with important information on it. So if you have text on your logo, it's really important that all of the text in your logo also go in the alt tag, so that every single word that's on your image is in your alt tag. That's the only way to create equivalent content for screen readers. The second issue that I run across all the time is no transcripts or subtitles for videos. And for transcripts, it's super easy. You just attach a Word document near the video and have someone type out exactly what it is said and done in the video as an attachment, or just something right under the video that can be easily consumable by the sight impaired people. For subtitles, this one gets a little convoluted. If you're using YouTube to host your video, it's super easy. you can have it auto-generate your closed captions in YouTube Studio, and which we all know works perfectly every single time. Or it would allow you to upload your own subtitles and timings. But I found that the caption file created on YouTube is never 100% accurate, but it is a giant head start. You can click into the captions file generated by YouTube, make corrections to it, and then republish it. And if you're not hosting it on YouTube, you can download your captions file and upload it to wherever you are hosting it from. I screenshotted myself in YouTube Studio, kind of doing a transcript of my daughter, or closed captions of my daughter after she had her wisdom teeth surgery. It's a pretty hilarious video, and it's literally the only video I have on YouTube. But it will allow you to edit your timings and edit the text during your timing. And you can even set it to stop playing while you're correcting the closed captions. The third issue is too much dependency on a mouse. Your site must be keyboard navigable at all times. To test this, just use your tab and enter key or your directional keys to make sure the tab catches every navigation or link item on a page. You got to keep your hover content and activity to a minimum. I know it's a style right now to kind of change the content just upon an easy scroll down a content page, which is super clean and super modern. But when you're using a mouse, but only when you're using a mouse. But for users who have an inability to use a mouse or who may be using their breath to navigate around a page, you really want to provide a way for those links to be accessible to all your users and not just able-bodied mouse users. Table layouts versus tabular data. Now, the year is 2023, and I assumed this one would have to go without saying since we are in the year 2023, but just last week I was handed a design by a client built completely in nested tables, and it made my heart super sad. And I had to check that I hadn't inadvertently traveled back to the year 1996 somehow. Luckily, most of the things that made the table layouts work in most browsers have been deprecated, but that has not stopped a lot of organizations from using these table layouts for things like email campaigns that don't have checks like that. I created a terrible site in tables, and most of the inline CSS I tried to use to make it actually function wouldn't work. So this is great news. Moving on to tabular data. When you're using a table for tabular data, you should add structure to the table, like a table header, table footer, table caption, row headers, column headers, and this helps provide context to the data within the table by helping the user keep track of what headers apply to which cells. And this includes, so in this first example, I don't have any table headers or table footers or captions. And it's almost identical to the accessible table that I have on the next slide from the front end. On the back end, it's completely different. So on this example that I have right here, I've included the table headers and footers. I've included the table captions. I'm using column and row headers to apply context to the data elements in the table for the sight impaired persons. Otherwise, this would just be reading out random data, and the user would have to keep track of which column and row they were on, which is not reasonable in terms of readability or consumability of that content. Go back one more, sorry. In the example in the deck, I've provided some alternating background colors CSS on the accessible table, which can also help out readability for conditions like dyslexia and ADHD, but otherwise they look completely identical on the front end. However, when just using a screen reader, the screen reader JAWS on the second example, JAWS keeps track of each data element and which headers apply to each specific cell. And I will say, not all screen readers are created equal, and JAWS is actually the only one I've used that provides this context in a meaningful way. It is expensive though. The fifth and final example is form field title association. By default, AEM forms, and this is, I'm speaking just from the context of AEM right now. AEM forms won't prompt you to create a binding label to associate to a form label to an input field on a form. And this has to be programmatically built into the form. This is true with most form builders, and people using screen readers can identify and understand form controls more easily when they are associated with labels, field sets, and other structural elements. In this first example, binding the labels in the input field is relatively easy since that label already exists. Using the for and ID attributes within the label tag help help that binding take place. For something like a search field, where you don't necessarily want to have a search label in front of the text box and then a search button, which is very kind of redundant, you can just add a CSS class to hide it visually while still binding the applicable label to the input field. Too often, this is skipped altogether, leaving no context or descriptor for the input field, which is really confusing for screen readers. And then this is the CSS that I would apply to that particular class. And this will just like remove it from anything that's not a screen reader. And you might be tempted to use like a display none for this particular class, but that display none actually hides it from a screen reader as well. So please do not do that.
All right, now we're going to move into the Q&A kind of section. So what would be the first step in approaching accessibility compliance?
So my first step is always running my site through Wave. It's a tool provided by WebAIM. It's super simple. It's not foolproof, but will give you a general guideline on where you are and where you need to be. It will flag contrast errors if the contrast is not great enough for color blindness situations. But it won't accurately test, and it also won't accurately test your alt text to your images. It checks to make sure that alt text is there, but it could literally say anything. Wave also makes it super easy to check to see if the alt text is actually helpful, but you have to actually dig more into the tool to be able to see what the alt text is. It won't flag it as an error. It will just make it easier for you to go alt text by alt text to check. You can also, sorry.
No, it's okay, go ahead.
You can also try to navigate your site using only your keyboard. If you can't access all the content on your site using only your keyboard, there might be some work to do. I usually use tab and enter and directional arrows if I'm really trying to get through all the content. And if you cannot reach that content, you probably ought to add some sort of a tab order to the sections in the order that you want it to read out. And if you want to try out a screen reader, those are actually super helpful. They take a lot of practice to get used to, like most things. But there are many free versions you could use, and the one on the top of my head is Chromebox. You can try to navigate with your eyes closed, using a screen reader or your screen covered. This one, it also takes some practice. Vox isn't the best. I mean, obviously the best one I have used is JAWS, but it is costly.
So it seems like there's a lot of tools out there to manage this. Why is it important to have developers that are trained in accessibility best practices?
So working in the AEM spaces, or really any content management system, accessibility is super easy to add into components that you're building. And so those features do not come out of the box. So it's really important to put safeguards in to allow authors to easily populate, say, I'm just using alt text as an example, alt text and titles around images and links, while also not providing a lot of shortcuts to allow authors to bypass those accommodations. While a lot of features do not come out of the box, that's why it's important for your developers to be well-versed in best practices so that they can build them into and extend those out-of-the-box components.
Yeah, it seems like that can really help in providing those safeguards, like you said. So what are some of the SEO benefits of having an accessible website?
So SEO and accessibility kind of go hand in hand. Having a logically laid out site that is clearly an extension of a planned outline is the most effective way to deliver content to your user. Using consistent headers, content driven from the top down, and a plan can only have a positive impact on SEO. It's like giving a map to your users and to the web crawlers.
Yeah, as a marketer, I can really recognize the importance of having a site that's easy to understand, but also one that ranks really well on search engines.
Definitely.
How does maintaining an accessible website improve the experience for all users?
So about a quarter of all web users use some sort of assistive technology to browse websites. But the main reason is basically the same across the board. A well thought out and carefully outlined content strategy is simply easier to navigate and identify a path to the content that you need. Just in terms of not limiting your audience, I feel like a quarter of all web users is a fairly significant portion of which you'd want to be inclusive. And as a marketing professional, you can identify. Can you identify which portion of the audience you'd like to exclude?
Yeah.
Likely not.
So what are some of the legal parameters that are put in place for website accessibility?
So the ADA was, the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990. There are no accessibility police that come around and give you a ticket for having a non-compliant site or non-accessible site. The onus of this falls on the owner of the site, and usually when it comes to universities, because a lot of universities have been sued over this, it ends up being the entire university's responsibility, and the onus falls on the entire university for not having a compliant site. And there's no warning other than litigation, and that's why it's important to monitor and audit your sites regularly. Depending on how often your content changes or how often you do a redesign, you might want to consider this as often as once a week, running your site through a wave report just to see if you're within parameters to avoid litigation.
Yeah, it seems like a regular part of site maintenance to keep auditing.
Definitely.
So thank you, Libby, for that deep dive into digital accessibility and compliance. It seems like there are some beginning steps for people to take if they've never thought about accessibility or if it's been a long time since their site has been audited, just to increase their overall accessibility and just improve user experience overall on their website. So if anybody has any questions, you can ask them in the chat. We do have one so far I can start off with. And I guess this is a common theme, I guess, for anyone that hasn't necessarily prioritized accessibility or hasn't really thought about it much. If there aren't any known issues or complaints, why should we change the site?
So if there's, like I said, no accessibility police. So you just really want to be on top of things to avoid litigation. You want to increase your reach. Like I said, a quarter of all of web users are using some sort of assistive technologies to access the web and your content. So just from a marketing perspective, I think it's probably in everyone's best practice to continually monitor. And you might not know of any issues right now just because you're not getting any complaints or you're not being sued. But that doesn't mean that the onus is not on you if someone catches a mistake.
Mm-hmm. Are there any testing tools? I know you've been talking about some throughout, but is there any other ones that you would recommend people use to discover what they may need to be doing on their website?
Sure. Yes. I have quite a few. There is a color blindness simulator that I like to use just to kind of run designs through to make sure that the contrast is acceptable on all 4 layers of color blindness, or even 5 now, I think there are. And it's called Toptal. I'll put the link in the chat, or you can put the link in the chat. Toptal.com is a color blindness simulator. I think I mentioned WebAIM has a tool called Wave that you can run any site through, and it will kind of give you contrast errors. Like I said, that one is not foolproof in terms of like the content of the alt text applied to each image. However, there are some paid services, like Site Improve is really thorough, and they'll even catch like word misspellings throughout your site to kind of help make your site more accessible.
All right. Well, thank you, Libby, and thank you everybody for joining us today. It's been great to learn about some of these best practices. And we'll see everybody on the next episode of Evolve with 3Share if there's no other questions. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.